Gramps.
Hi, Danny boy. How was school today?
Oh, it was neat. Miss Brooks, our science teacher, said today that she was going to bring in a computer to class next week.
A computer? Now, that is exciting.
Miss Brooks says that we ought to learn all we can about computers because everything today is done by computers.
Well, Danny, now I don't know about that. Some things will never be done better by a computer, thank goodness.
Like what, Gramps?
Like a Babe Ruth home run in the bottom of the ninth.
My friend Mark had a baseball video game that we play on his television at home.
Yes, Danny, but there's nothing like being in the stands on a summer day and watching that baseball sail over your head into the bleachers.
You're right, Gramps. We sure do have fun at the ballpark. All the hot dogs and root beer I can eat. But the video baseball game is fun, too. Have you ever played video baseball?
No, Danny, I never have. I've played the real kind of baseball, but that was a long time ago.
Did they have video baseball when you were a kid, Gramps?
No, Danny, it wasn't even invented yet.
When was the computer invented, Gramps?
I guess you could say the first real computer was invented in 1939. It was called the Mark I, and it weighed 5 tons.
Really, Gramps? Miss Brooks said that the computer she's going to bring will fit on the top of her desk.
Computers have been getting smaller and smarter all the time. They've come a long way in 30 years.
30 years? Boy, that's a long time.
Oh, that's not such a long time as all that, Danny. But then people have been computing and calculating numbers since they learned to count. The Chinese invented the abacus over 2,000 years ago.
What's an abacus?
An abacus is a device used for counting. It's a small frame, usually made of wood. You can hold it in your hand.
Like a pocket calculator?
Exactly, the same idea. Strings of beads were stretched across the frame, and they would slide the beads into different positions on the frame to indicate different numbers being counted. But the abacus is basically a calculator, not a computer.
What's the difference?
A calculator can only do arithmetic, but a computer can do much more.
Like what, for instance?
A computer can store information in its memory banks and retrieve that information for you when you need it. And you can program it to do different things.
Like play video baseball?
And a lot of other things. Your teacher's right, Danny. You should learn all you can about computers.
Do you know a lot about computers, Gramps?
Well, I know a little something. What would you like to know?
Who invented the first computer?
Well, Danny, the computer was actually invented on paper in the early 1800s.
What do you mean, invented on paper?
Well, the idea was there, and it was sketched out on paper, but it was never built.
Who was he?
The man who first thought up the computer was a mathematician and inventor named Charles Babbage. He also invented the speedometer and the cow catcher used on locomotives. Well, as a mathematician, he designed a machine that had all the essential elements of today's modern computer.
Could it play video baseball?
No, that's one thing it couldn't do. But it had a logic center, a memory system for storing information, a control unit for carrying out instructions, and the means for getting that information into and out of the machine. And he could program the operating procedures.
How come no one ever built one?
He did manage to build a model of it, but it was a pretty complicated piece of machinery. It took thousands of individual wheels, levers, and belts working together with extreme precision. If they'd actually built that computer, it would have been larger than a football field.
That's pretty big, all right.
And no battery power either. They would have had to use 5 or 6 steam engines just to turn it on.
So it was never built?
No, just a bunch of drawings and designs, a paper invention. But he had some good ideas. One of them was to feed information into his computer on punch cards. This idea inspired a young engineer named Herman Hollerith. He adapted the punch card idea to a machine designed to tabulate information for the Census Bureau. He persuaded them to give it a try, and it worked.
What happened then?
Well, other people kept working on different designs and exchanging ideas. Then around 1939, a researcher at the Bell Telephone Laboratories developed a computer that could do calculations over the telephone.
Would it fit on top of a desk?
It wouldn't fit in a 2-car garage.
That's pretty big, all right.
And loud, too. They say that IBM's first computer took up a room the size of this house, and that it made a racket like thousands of marbles clicking against each other.
What made all that noise?
Relay switches clicking on and off.
What are relay switches?
Well, you see, Danny, basically a computer is a complex maze of on-off switches that reduce all information within the machine to one of 2 states, yes or no, represented either by the presence of an electrical charge at a particular spot or the absence of an electrical charge. The computer relied on electromechanical on-off switches called relays, which physically opened and closed like the old Morse code keys.
What old Morse code keys?
Well, you remember in all those John Wayne westerns when the sheriff would walk into the telegraph office and say, "Send a wire to Dodge City," and the clerk would sit down at his desk and start tapping out that message on his Morse code key?
And it made a real loud clicking noise?
Yeah, that's right, Danny.
Is that what they used in the first computers?
It was a relay switch very much like that, Danny, and there were thousands of them inside the machine, constantly clicking on and off while the machine was doing the calculations.
That must have been loud, all right.
They say you couldn't hear yourself think in that room when the computer was running.
And your pocket calculator doesn't make any noise at all?
This pocket calculator, which is much smaller than one old relay switch, can do twice as much work as the old computers, twice as fast, with complete accuracy every time. And it cost me less than $20.
Now that's progress.
And that progress came because new people were constantly adding new ideas to the computer. For instance, that old computer we were talking about?
The one with loud relay switches?
That's the one. Well, that computer used a different system of counting numbers than the computers that came before it.
How are they different?
Well, the old computer was designed to count by tens using the decimal system. The decimal system uses 10 digits, 0 through 9, and it probably comes from a time long ago when humans first realized that they had 10 fingers and toes. In fact, the word digit comes from the Latin word for finger or toe.
Do you mean there are different ways of counting?
Oh, there's several different ways, Danny. For instance, there is the duodecimal system, in which you count by 12s instead of 10s.
How do you count by 12s?
Well, how do you count the months of the year or the hours of the day?
That's right. There are 12 months in a year, and the clock goes from 1 to 12. Are there other ways of counting, too?
Oh, yes. And this new computer used one called the binary system.
What's the binary system?
In the binary system, only 2 digits are used, 0 and 1. To create a 2, you simply move a column to the left, just as you do to create a 10 in the decimal system.
Does it work very well?
Well, actually, it's very cumbersome. You can represent any number with the binary system, but long numbers require long strings of zeros and ones. Now, for a person to be calculating numbers with this long series of zeros and ones, well, it would be practically impossible. But for a digital computer, it's a piece of cake.
And people kept improving the computer?
Oh, yes. The next big improvement was to replace all those noisy relay switches with vacuum tubes. I guess that'd be around 1946 it was at the University of Pennsylvania. They called it ENIAC.
ENIAC? What does that mean?
Well, the word ENIAC stands for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Calculator. It was bigger than our garage. It had 18,000 vacuum tubes, 70,000 resistors, 10,000 capacitors, and 6,000 switches.
How did it work?
Not too well, it turned out. The vacuum tubes kept burning out, so it never worked for very long a time. When it worked, it could perform 5,000 additions or subtractions per second, which was a lot in those days. Of course, it doesn't even compare with the speed and accuracy of my pocket calculator.
And your pocket calculator doesn't make that noise.
No, works without making a sound.
And you can carry it around in your pocket. You can't do that with a 2-car garage computer.
You sure can, Daddy. Why, those old monsters were put together much like early radios. They had tangles of wires connecting each separate component. And if you wanted to change the program or make it perform different operations, you had to rewire the whole assembly by hand. It was kind of like the early telephone switchboards with lots of wires and plugs, and it could take days to rewire the program. Why, you can change the entire program on a modern computer in a matter of seconds now.
Boy, computers sure have changed a lot.
Yes, and they were changing just as dramatically and just as quickly, it seems, in the early days. Why, ENIAC was virtually obsolete by the time they'd put it together and ready to run.
Why was that, Gramps?
Well, Danny, within a year of the first public appearance of ENIAC, 3 scientists invented a tiny, simple device called the transistor.
What's a transistor?
The word transistor is short for transfer resistance, and that's what it did. It would transfer the resistance from one point to another. The transistor was a lot smaller than the old vacuum tubes, it worked faster, and it didn't burn out nearly so often. It didn't heat up like the old tubes did, so you could pack them closer together, and they cost less to make.
Is that when computers began to get smaller?
That was a definite turning point in the development of the computer, all right. Within a few years of the development of the first transistor, these scientists built the first fully transistorized, or solid-state, computer.
Did they give that one a name, too?
Yep, they called it Leprechaun. I don't know why.
Well, I guess if it's their computer, they can call it anything they want to.
I guess they can.
Tell me more about the transistor.
Well, the transistor was nothing more than a sandwich of semiconducting material.
Not peanut butter and jelly.
No, mostly crystals of germanium.
I thought it was silicone.
Not at that time, Danny. Silicon came later. Anyway, these crystals were arranged so that a tiny current of electricity entering one part of the sandwich could control a larger current in another, so they could be used as switches. These on-off switches are called logic gates. They pass on information in the form of pulses of electricity. There are thousands of these gates in a small computer, each opening and closing more than 1,000,000 times a second, sending bits of information through the computer's circuitry in 1/1000th of a second. This is what took the place of those old clicking relay switches.
Boy, that makes quite a different computer, all right. What came next?
Well, it didn't take long for someone to realize the wiring could be printed directly on a board, eliminating much of the hand wiring. That speeded things up quite a bit.
Then what happened?
Then came the big one, the microchip.
And who invented the microchip?
Well, Danny, there's a funny thing about inventions. Two different men working in separate research departments came up with the same idea at the same time.
Two inventors?
Oh, there were probably quite a few more out there who could have made the same discovery in time. That's the thing about inventors. But these two did something about their invention. They invented a chip that worked.
How did it work, Gramps?
They realized that any number of transistors could be etched directly on a single piece of silicon along with the connections between them. This made an integrated circuit which contained entire sections of a computer. For example, a logic circuit or a memory register. So they set out to manufacture them, and while they were making them, other designers kept cramming in more and more transistors. Now they're etching hundreds of thousands of them on tiny silicon chips. Then they began to incorporate more circuits onto the chips.
Sounds like it's getting crowded on that chip.
Well, even this great idea presented a problem.
What's that, Gramps?
Well, with the circuits rigidly printed or fixed in the silicon, the chips would perform only the duties for which they were designed.
You mean you couldn't change them to do other things?
Not until just recently. A young engineer invented the microprocessor.
What's a microprocessor?
A microprocessor contained the entire central processing unit of a single computer on one chip. With it, a single chip could be programmed to do any number of things.
Like running a spaceship?
As well as running a digital watch. The microprocessor is what makes it possible for your science teacher to carry in a computer and put it on her desk.
Sure beats carrying in a two-car garage.